Listen to media telling you stories, just take it directly from me. More than a century since we've been free. Just come to my city and see for yourself how they live it. 2020, they ain't with the vision. We gon' bring them together, and I don't really give a fuck if you Muslim or Christian. No time for division. My people in Gaza, Yafa and Janine. The people of Nabis, Haifa, Wal Khalid. My people in Yemen, Syria and Lebanon. We got your back cause we know how it feels. Là c'est qu'un rêve, mais je sais que je reviendrai. Je pense comme ma chien, ça m'a rien rapporté. Je sais que je suis capable, faut juste me pousser. Là pour le coup, c'est maintenant ou jamais. Fuck these corrupt politicians who steal from their people and don't represent them. I said it, we fight for our rights and it's anti-Semitic. You think after being oppressed they would get it, yeah.
Fuck it, yeah.
Welcome to the Saudi Arabia podcast. You just heard part of a track called Jerusalem Freestyle, written and performed by my guest Marwan AbdelHamid. Marwan is a 20-year-old Palestinian activist, hip-hop artist, entrepreneur, podcast host, and social media influencer. And he's one of those rare Palestinians who have made promoting the Palestinian cause a central mission in everything that he does, and didn't just wait until hashtag Save Sheikh Jarrah or hashtag Gaza under attack became trending last month. He's been fully awake and active for Palestine when most of us have honestly taken our foot off the pedal over the last few years. I recorded this interview with Marwan back in March before the latest Israeli human rights violations and crimes. And I'm so inspired by his boldness in putting Palestinian rights at the forefront. His music, his content, his podcast, his startup all revolve around Palestine. It took me 16 episodes to finally make an episode about Palestine. And I'm so passionate about the topic. I mean, you'll hear me talk more than Marwan in this episode. Not just because I'm Palestinian myself, but because it's one of humanity's longest ongoing daily civil rights atrocities. And the world continues to fail the Palestinians, in part because they've been led to believe there is a serious roadmap to peace and a two-state solution underway. So Israel's apartheid is simply temporary and hence tolerable. Turns out most Israelis neither want us to have equal rights as them, nor carve out a state for us on what's left of our own land. Well, we're here to change the game, and this generation is pumped to demand equal rights and break the shackles. Marwan grew up in Gaza, which is where my family's from in Palestine, and now he's a student in America where his voice and influence is much needed. As I said, this interview is from back in March of this year, and it was actually a ClubHouse room that we set up entitled, Does Palestine Have a Branding Problem? We talk about anti-Semitism, right of return, music, social media, echo chambers, lobbying for Palestinian rights in the US, startups in Palestine. And even though our discussion was before the international media started paying attention again, and before millions of new activists rose up in support, a lot of the dynamics around Israel's brutal occupation remain the same. The challenges facing our freedom still as stubborn, albeit more hopeful. I hope you get inspired and find your own path and method to support human rights. Enjoy. So Marwan, we spoke on ClubHouse privately like a few weeks ago. We connected and I actually met your dad a few times in Amman through making t-shirts, connecting over all his artistic projects over the years.
Yeah.
And I'm 40 years old, by the way. Inta, what are you? How old are you?
I'm half your age. I'm 20.
You're 20. That's amazing. Damn, man. It's like, I'm so happy to meet someone so young that's really interested in the narration of the Palestinian cause in general, in so many different ways, using today's media, using today's tools, talking to the other side, making music. For those of you who don't know Marwan has so many things going right now. He's still an undergrad in California. He has a startup called Grow Home, which he'll talk about in a bit. And he has a couple of music tracks already released. I'm hoping for more coming soon. He has his own podcast. And you're only 20 years old, man. And I'm just loving what you're doing, man.
زي ما حكيت, I do have a lot of things going, but I would say that, there is a North Star in everything that I do. And I think that's very important, especially in a generation where people are kind of lacking meaning. And thankfully, I found that meaning, and the meaning is making people's lives better, especially in my home country of Palestine. And I think that the way that you do that is not necessarily through international aid or charity. I think the best way to do that is actually creating the infrastructure for success. And I think that's something that people in the West that do have very good intentions don't really understand. There is a problem with the international aid structures that have been put in place ever since the 1960s, and we haven't moved past this sort of white man's burden, I would say. And I even see it in diaspora communities where they feel like, diaspora communities feel like they have a burden to the poor people living مثلا in Palestine. They don't see Palestine as, for example, a frontier market where there's opportunities to actually make money and make the lives of millions of people better. And I think that's kind of what I want to change. That's why, for example, my podcast called Palestinian Excellence, I like to highlight Palestinian success, Palestinian excellence. And this is tied into Palestine's branding problem. I think it's a shame, but whenever you talk to Palestine, you tell someone you're Palestinian, they're like, oh, I'm sorry. What do you mean I'm sorry, bro? It's a blessing to be Palestinian, bilaks. You know what I mean? That's what drives me every day, is I really want to reclaim the narrative and change the narrative.
Yeah, I hear you, man. There's so much we can do. It gives you purpose without you seeking it. Not everybody's obviously on this track of activism, let's call it, or not just activism, but linking your project to bettering the cause or improving the prospects for Palestinians, because it's such a crazy, tragic, brutal human rights story. And I used to be an activist back in New York when I was your age exactly, especially before 9/11. I was an undergrad at NYU, and it was ad hoc protests in the rain, passing out flyers, vigils, New York Times sit-ins, like crazy stuff. I'm 40 years old now, and I'm still trying to figure out ways. I think we're onto something now. There's something kind of happening with media today. There's just there's a culmination of there's this explosion of data, of content creation. You have new media like TikTok, like ClubHouse, short soundbite consumption, fully democratized creation. Yani there's so much that the world can see from Palestinian creators. And honestly, for me, I dream of one day enough people are outraged at what Palestinians are going through, that something will just snap happen, like something very similar to what happened in South Africa. It's not a far-fetched dream, you know?
It's not far-fetched, but what I will say, Imad, about soundbite media, etc., it's very easy because of the business models of these platforms. You fall into what I call filter bubbles. Right. So you kind of consume media that you want to consume. You're not given any sort of opposition to your own beliefs and viewpoints. So you fall into these echo chambers. And that's something, in my opinion, that's very dangerous. So that's how people fall into these alt-right white supremacist circles, because they start off, they have مثلا economic hardships, and then they start getting ads where it's like, it's the immigrants taking your jobs. And then they click on that, and then the algorithm sees that they're clicking on that and pushes even more content towards them. And then they fall into this echo chamber where their views are being voiced by others, and they have this belief now. They're like, oh, I'm not the only one that thinks that immigrants are taking our jobs. There's this whole community. And that's why I hate preaching to the choir. There's more effective ways of getting our narrative out there. Instead of telling someone that's Palestinian, إنه لازم نحرر فلسطين, we need to free Palestine, I would actually rather go into circles that disagree with me and lay out a vision and lay out a narrative that they have never heard before. Because if it's not me that's going to go do that, they're never actually going to be exposed to a narrative that tells them that Palestinians are human beings. And it's a shame, right? Because we're all human beings. We all deserve equal rights, human rights. But the reality is, a lot of people don't see it that way. We actually have to understand reality in order to change it.
Yeah, listen, the rabbit holes that you're talking about, the algorithms on YouTube especially, where you end up just listening to charismatic content creators that push a certain agenda that you're already a bit susceptible to, and then you start solidifying that echo chamber. Absolutely, there's a danger in that. First of all, when you're preaching to the choir, it's all about education. It's all about facts, understanding. When you're negotiating and when you're representing your cause, when you're representing your country, there are so many facts right now. I mean, you're 20 years old. By the time you're 40, there's going to be nearly a century of just post-Nakba data, like a century of post-Nakba historical facts. That's like insane. How are you going to digest all of that? Like our parents, everything was a little bit fresh. There was the first intifada. You could kind of digest what was happening. There was no social media. There was no echo chambers as such. Yani the narrative was maybe a bit clearer, but also there weren't that many publications out there. I want to go into something that I kept coming back to when we talk about the Palestinian cause and how it's perceived worldwide. First of all, let's set some ground rules. Why do we care, you and I, that the rest of the world understands, especially the people in power, especially friends of Israel, Zionists, Americans? Why do we care that they know details about our struggle and they know that there's an outrage and there's something that has to be done, that the status quo is basically fucked up, and that we have to do something? Because a lot of Palestinian activists, they've basically are resigned to just not talking to the other side, not talking to the world, and just working internally in the struggle, where whatever it might be charity work, might be empowering, Palestinian youth. But why do you think you and I are interested in this global kind of outreach?
Well, I can speak for myself, and I'll tell you the reason why I am so invested is because I grew up in a world where interconnectedness through internet was normal, right? Like I grew up on that stuff. And so I think it's normal to be able to speak to someone that I've never met. And I think it's normal to be able to create relationships with people that you've never met and to empathize with someone that you've never met. Even if you've never seen them in your life, you'll be able to understand where they're coming from. You'll be able to look past the headlines and see that this is a human being. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of what has happened in Israeli society, also in the US, there's been an intentional dehumanization of the Palestinian. And this has been done historically through media, right? So there's been a lot of vilification of Arabs and Palestinians. Hollywood and the CIA come from the same breed. They push American foreign policy. And in order to justify the actions and in order to justify everything that's been done against Palestinians, you have to dehumanize them. Because when you dehumanize something, you make it okay for you kind of justify, right? It's dehumanization and then justification. So these people are barbaric, these people are savages, and you have all these Orientalist tropes that Edward Said describes and goes back to, the French conquering of Egypt in the 1800s. But you dehumanize them, you say these people are terrorists, and then you justify what's going on. They're terrorists, so we're going to put up a wall to be safe. And then it makes sense. You understand, okay, yeah, terrorists, they don't want terrorists, they're going to put up a wall. Yani, in a very simplistic world, it makes sense why they think this way. That's when you and I come in, because we have that information and we're able, through our grasp of the English language, we're able to actually disseminate that information in a way that people cannot contradict what we're saying. These are facts that we're stating. And I think it's beautiful that we're able to actually just get on this ClubHouse and disseminate information. I think it's beautiful that I'm able to go on TikTok and disseminate information for people that are 14, 15 years old. And I'm not trying to lead anyone down a rabbit hole. I'm stating facts when I talk. So I think that's why it's important, because you also look historically, we're not, and this is my opinion, maybe people disagree, but we're not going to free Palestine through armed struggle. I'm not willing to advocate for the shedding of Palestinian blood. I never have and I never will. I think that enough Palestinian lives have been lost. I'll never advocate for the loss of Palestinian life. But I think, disseminating information has never been easier. So we take advantage of it.
And for me, my purpose for spreading the word globally is because external pressure matters. Israel gets a lot of aid from the US. So I would like it to be attached to some conditions that are to the benefit of human rights, to the benefit of Palestinians, to the benefit of Israel, to the benefit of America, since it's paying for most of the atrocities that are going on. So for me, I think pressure is necessary. It's not something we can ignore and not work on and then hope for an outcome. Yes, there are some Israeli activists in Israeli society that are aware that the status quo is just untenable, that it's unacceptable, that it's immoral. They're not actually in power. So on their own, I don't think they can do much. They can do a lot of bridge building and great discussions here and there, just like we're doing. It's been happening for decades. The top negotiators on our behalf have been talking for decades, and they've come up with some really disastrous agreements that they've signed on over the last couple of decades. So pressure is very important. I ask myself, what will it take for the Palestinian cause? And when I say Palestinian cause, I mean everything that's happened. There's been atrocities in the Nakba where Palestinians have been forcibly removed from their homes. That's something that Israel cannot deny. It's not anti-Semitic to call that out. There has been ethnic cleansing. And then you have Israel's refusal of the return of refugees, which is countering all of the modern conventions that humans have put in place. And then you have the apartheid that's taking place today. And then you have the Gaza open air prison. These are just the headlines. I ask myself, what will it take for the world to say, okay, that's enough? And for Israel to say, oh, shit, you're right. Okay, we're going to resolve this. We promise we're going to resolve this right away. We know this is unacceptable. We've been doing it for too long. Let's work something out right away that's just. In a similar vein that the South African government kind of like said, okay, done. Let's just make things right, What will it take for us to get there? One thing, in my opinion, that the Palestinian cause struggles with, to arrive at a mass appeal or like a critical mass, a threshold where so many people are just like, fuck, man, how can this cannot go on. There has to be an outcry. One thing that's the Palestinian cause and Palestinian efforts have been smeared with the label of anti-Semitism. This is something that I keep going back to, and it's something that I think is a barrier, but it's not really a barrier because the Palestinian cause itself, whether it's the BDS movement component of it, whether it's demand for refugee return, there's nothing anti-Semitic about it. At the core of it, it's a civil rights issue. And beyond that, it's an issue of restitution for all the crimes that have happened. Return of refugees and the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing and human rights violations. So the whole smear of anti-Semitism. I think a lot of Americans are afraid of speaking out because they think, no shit, if I show some sympathy to the Palestinian cause, I'm going to be smeared with that. If I criticize the state of Israel, I might be smeared with that. Yani, what are your thoughts on that?
So I'm actually on Canary Mission. I don't know if you know what that is.
Yeah, I learned about it just recently on ClubHouse. You're on Canary Mission, so that means I'm going to be on Canary Mission after this interview.
And wallah, man, I'm on Canary Mission.
No way.
I checked it 2 weeks ago.
So for those who don't know, Canary Mission, I really haven't browsed it much. I just know that it's...
it's a website that basically puts Palestinian activists on and then exposes them, quote unquote. Exposes them, brings out tweets from like 7 years ago and stuff like that. For me, they said I glorified a terrorist and I supported anti-Israel agitators. And that, since I went to Minnesota last year for the SJP conference, that was also anti-Semitic. The Canary Mission within itself, if you go to its core, I don't think it's a bad thing, right, to want to call out anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism is a big problem. And I think that we can't ignore it as Palestinians because our struggle is linked to the struggle against anti-Semitism, and at its core. But I think what's happened is that there's been the weaponization of anti-Semitism. And a lot of Jews would agree with me when I say this, that for example, Canary Mission now, instead of just calling out anti-Semitism, it's become a tool to silence Palestinian activists and to put the label of anti-Semite over them so that we don't need to listen to you anymore because khalas, now you're an anti-Semite. The reason why I'm on Canary Mission is because I made a post. It was called, cool Arab woman that you should look into. I put on my Instagram. One of them was Layla Khalid.
Layla Khalid was part of the PLFP, and she hijacked a plane.
Yeah.
Right, but she didn't hurt anyone. She never killed anyone, and she's considered a terrorist by Israel, by America, etc. But then you actually have to look, not necessarily rationalize, but contextualize what is terrorism. Who gets to define that term, right? Anna, in my opinion, I think that David Ben Gurion is a big terrorist. He was involved in Plan Dalit. He was involved in a lot of the ethnic cleansing of Palestinian villages. But some people would disagree with me, right? So when you slap a label on me and you say I am anti-Semitic because I said, Layla Khalid is cool and she was actually, she did a lot for our cause, I think that's unfair. And I think that is a way to try and silence me as a Palestinian activist. And I will not fall for that. However, there are instances, I would say, where people, Palestinian activists specifically, really need to think about whether or not they're being anti-Semitic. You can't just say, no. This is no way I'm being anti-Semitic. No, there's no way. I'm not, there are some instances where you need to look, and this is why I'm big on trying to understand other people. Why do you think I'm anti-Semitic? Let's talk about it. I'm actually curious as to why. And you'll realize that a lot of the times, مثلا, people say BDS is anti-Semitic. So then I tell them, okay, if it's not boycotting, how else am I supposed to protest Israeli occupation? Give me another tool, مثلا. And they won't be able to give me another tool. So that's when that this label of being anti-Semitic is being used not to actually call out anti-Semitism, it's actually to silence Palestinian activism. So that's a shame. I think it's a shame.
Definitely, anti-Semitism is a big problem in the world, and it's been a problem for centuries. We can't deny that.
We shouldn't deny that. And I see, it's unfortunate. A lot of people do deny that.
Even in America, whether it's white Americans, black Americans, they fall for those tropes. And the anti-Semitic tropes are so prevalent all over the world still till this day. All kinds of tropes are sad and terrible, and they don't advance anybody's cause. They actually do the opposite, especially with our cause. The BDS movement itself has been successfully, although falsely, tied to anti-Semitism. Pretty much most of the claim from the Friends of Israel side about BDS being anti-Semitic is based on a couple of anti-Semitic tweets and statements that are made by people who also support BDS. Well, that's almost like saying, you know what, there's a bunch of cops in your department that we found to be racist. Hence, police in America, it's an illegitimate organization because, look, we found 100 cops being racist. No, that's it. So you can't actually call an entire movement anti-Semitic based on, even if it's 1,000 people that claim that they are supporting BDS are actually ignorant and hateful enough to make anti-Semitic statements. That's not my problem. Of course, it's my responsibility to call it out wherever I see it. Absolutely. BDS management, the organization, whoever is in charge should always be, and it's in their charter actually, that anti-Semitism is actually unacceptable. So there's nothing really about BDS that's anti-Semitic. And by the way, the reason why we're talking about BDS and anti-Semitism and that as a smear, the same smear that's being attached to the BDS movement, which is a non-violent movement, the same smear is being attached to the entire Palestinian cause and the entire Palestinian image. It's the same thing. The Palestinian cause is a moral cause. It's a human rights, civil rights cause. And so that's why we're talking about this. So going back, what is anti-Semitism exactly? There's the definition from, I think, 2 decades ago by Sharansky. I think it was the 3 Ds. I'm sure you've heard of the 3 Ds. I think the delegitimizing the state of Israel, dehumanizing, I think, Jewish people. And then the third one is, I forgot what the other D was.
It's demonization, double standards.
Double standards. So the easiest one to actually, if we're here defending ourselves, defending the Palestinian cause, let's actually demolish these 3 Ds and move on, just so people understand that we actually do not harbor any irrational fear, irrational hate, any kind of hate towards the Jewish people. The double standard thing, I get it. When you have Bashar al-Assad and other Arab figures claiming that, oh man, Israel is being brutal. For Israelis are for them, it's like a joke because look who's talking. It's people using the Palestinian cause for political reasons, and they're even more brutal with their own people. And for us activists, we don't have to defend the Syrian regime, the Saudi regime, the Iranian regime, the Turkish regime. We don't have to defend them. We're not here to defend them. And we're also not here, though, to litigate every single cause around the world, go around the world. The Kurds deserve their own country. Should you and I start fighting for the Kurdish national movement before we start working on the Palestinian national movement? I mean, there are thousands of grievances around the world. There's a moral stance for each of them, and we're not. So the double standard concept for me is out the window.
With anti-Semitism, I really don't think it's my place to define things, right? Like I like to listen because I'm not Jewish, so
Yeah.
it's as if someone came and said, like spoke on my behalf and said, this is what you shouldn't say. And this is, I think one of the problems that I had with SJP is that there was a lot of people speaking on my behalf as a Palestinian, not necessarily representing my views or what I stood for. So I kind of stay away from that. But I do think that one of the things as Palestinian activists that we lack, especially the youth, is historical context and knowledge. And that's what I try to tackle through my work. We were never taught Palestinian history, at least I wasn't. And, a lot of Palestinians in the diaspora weren't taught. So then when you're explaining to someone your identity and, why it means so much to you that Palestinians do exist, this is a big one. When someone says Palestine does not exist, it was never a nation state, therefore, you guys don't have any right to self-determination, blah, blah, blah. People don't know how to answer. And it's a shame because, what they're saying isn't true. And this is, delegitimization of an identity that spans 4,000 years. Haram, it's a shame. There's a real lack in this market of Palestinian education, in my opinion, especially in English. Because a lot of us Palestinians living outside, a lot of us don't speak Arabic as well as we would want to. And, a lot of people in Chile, they don't even speak English, they just speak Spanish. And there's so many Palestinians in Chile. So that's what I try to do, just to reinforce the Palestinian identity, the historical facts, and to know how to respond when someone says something about Palestine not existing.
There's a lot of claims. I hear a lot of claims similar to that. Like, why didn't Jordan create a Palestinian state from 1948 to 1967? A lot of Israelis will be like, wait a minute, why didn't you guys already create a state back then? But you're right, there's so many things. And one thing in terms of education, how hard it is to find what laws discriminate specifically against non-Jews inside Israel and in the West Bank? It's not easy to find. The best one I found was from January, the B'Tselem Apartheid report that was very controversial that came out. And one thing that's mentioned in the B'Tselem report, which is really amazing, that it's articulated well, is that if you're a Palestinian in Nasra, for example, right, with Israeli citizenship, right, you can vote. Who are you likely to marry? Some Palestinian, correct? I mean, that's kind of like your cultural leanings, and that's your right to marry a Palestinian from your own culture. Where are most Palestinians living nearby? There's more in the West Bank and Gaza, right? So why not, pick from, fall in love with someone from West Bank and Gaza? The minute you decide to marry someone who is not an Israeli citizen, who's a Palestinian from the West Bank or Gaza, then you start realizing where all the discrimination comes in, where you can live. Can you naturalize? Can you not naturalize? Where can they live? Where do you have to go? What kind of IDs do you have to do? So this is something that most Palestinians, when they're confronted with this, they don't know how to articulate it that well. But this is a major discrimination point. So this is why I urge people to read the B'Tselem report, which is really amazing.
And there's also just the lack of access to resources. Right? That's one of the biggest things, because I do think I like to, my work is really focused on economic development in Palestine, because, until we're free, there's people that need to eat, and there are institutions that need to be put in place, infrastructures that need to be put in place for people to actually be able to prosper, even though they are under occupation. People need to make a living for themselves. People need to educate themselves in order to actually know how to fight the occupation. And so I think, the lack of access to resources, especially in the West Bank, where Area C is controlled by the Israeli authorities, that's where all the resources are. That's where all the water is. The new city of Rawabi, which is the first Palestinian city that's been built like a settlement kind of. There's disputes over water. Israel controls the water, and this is one of the reasons why it's taken so long to develop Rawabi as, this prosperous city, is because there's no water in Rawabi. And that's very easy for people to understand, right? It's like we don't have access to water. There's roads that we can't go on. Why? And then it becomes kind of easier to articulate to someone that doesn't necessarily have all the historical, like, why don't we have an airport? That's what I always say.
Yeah, the human rights violations and the claim that this is apartheid, there's so many. You're right. And the roads, the issue of the roads. I mean, the fact that you can't use roads, Jewish-only roads, I mean, that's just something that's not being talked about enough, especially in American circles with American youth and American activists and in American Congress. For me, I spent many years in the US, and this was part of my passion to bring about this awareness. And the PR limitations that Palestinians have is that on the Israeli side that likes to make excuses for the status quo, which is pretty much apartheid in the West Bank specifically, and an open air prison in Gaza, is for security purposes. And when you evolve past that argument, obviously these people are resisting, they have the right to resist. It's your move first. You have to take your foot off their necks first, and then we can talk as human beings, and then you can open the road. It's not, this is kind of like the whole analogy for me with Israel's need for security. And I understand it. Israel sees itself as it's a nation state, it's a sovereign state, it has all the power, it wants what's good for its people, great. But you can't demand of Palestinians not to resist, to basically give up every single form of resistance. Even BDS is being attacked, and it's almost like the demand is like, well, I will allow BDS once Palestinians have eradicated anti-Semitism from the world. Anti-Semitism is a huge problem, and it's always going to be there, sadly. I hope it gets eradicated, but we cannot wait until the rest of the world fixes itself until we get our own rights back. So,
just the point to make on that, on the Jewish safety point, and I think that, Palestinian belonging and Jewish safety are often, there's a dichotomy, right? It's like it's either Palestinian belonging or it's either Jewish safety. Like it's sort of like either or.
Yeah.
And I disagree with that. And I think that the two-state solution, Kaman, is rooted in this belief that these two, different people are actually so different that they cannot live together. And there's always going to have to be a power structure in which one is oppressed and one is the oppressor. And I disagree with that.
Yeah.
Right. And you only have to look at South Africa to understand that, albeit in South Africa, there's still a lot of economic inequalities, but, you have to go back to the 1960s and look at where they were versus where they are now. Right. I believe that the people who advocate for a two-state solution kind of believe that there's only one or the other. It's only either Palestinians are going to be living here without the Jews, or there's going to be the Jews. And I don't believe that, to be honest. And I think that we need to move past this narrative of pushing for either or, because at the end of the day, there is no future without Israelis in the land, and there's no future without Palestinians in the land. And I stand by that point because I don't believe in kicking out 7 million Israelis. Like there's people that are born there that, it wasn't within their capacities to choose whether or not they were born in Jaffa or Haifa or Tel Aviv, right? Like, and then they grow up in a system where they're taught that Palestinians are the enemy, and they only see Palestinians through this propaganda in the media and in their school books, and they're taught that they're going to go to the army when they're 16 to fight the Palestinians. And so what I've come to realize is that everyone is a product of their environment, right? So if you grow up, in Kentucky, and you're surrounded by Trump supporters, and everyone tells you that immigrants are bad and everyone's racist, you're most likely going to end up that way. And I would bet probably 80% you're going to end up the same way as your parents and your group of friends, even though there's the internet. Yeah, we understand there's the internet, but it comes back to filter bubble, like the filter bubble and echo chambers. You're not going to go out of your way to search for information that attacks your own identity, because being racist and being all this is a part of your own identity, right? And I think this is where empathy for me comes in, and I think this is where my generation is a bit different, is that we are able to empathize and understand why people, without rationalizing, because I don't want to ever think that people
think I'm rationalizing racism or rationalizing being anti-Palestinian. I just understand. I understand that people grew up in these echo chambers, and I understand the Jewish trauma and, the 2,000 years of persecution and the way that it's led up to a system where now you have the once oppressed oppressing another group. And you have to understand that. And I'll talk to anyone about this because a lot of people will disagree with me. But I think it's really important to understand that in order to move past the issue, right? Because the issue isn't we have to kick out 7 million Israelis and every single. Where are they going to go? Like what? That's not a viable solution to kick out Israelis. And I have heard it from people, right? I have heard, let's just go back to Europe. When people, and these are people that usually are not Palestinians, that are speaking on behalf of the Palestinian cause, saying, yeah, they just need to go back to Europe. What have you done? Yeah, how is that helping us in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah.
So I think that's also to do with the branding problem, is that there's a lot of elevation of pro-Palestinian voices that don't necessarily represent the views on the ground. And yeah, it's
listen, no, I mean, you lived in Gaza, you understand that the Israelis aren't going anywhere, and there's several generations of Israelis now. So even if we don't think that their biblical claim is legitimate, you have now a bunch of generations that are.
Listen, I don't even like to get into these biblical narratives and stuff. I think it's so counterproductive.
Exactly, there's no point. But by the way, Yani, what do you think about Israelis who say, well, Palestinian second-generation refugees don't have a right? Why are they given refugee status? Khalas, their grandparents were refugees. Fuck it, just get on, live in Canada or Jordan, wherever the fuck you are. That's what a lot of right-wing Israelis would love to say. What do you say about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Whenever someone says that to me, I just ask them, so why is it that a Jew in New York that's never stepped foot in Palestine or Israel, that has, no family there, why do they have something granted to them called the law of return? Why do you get instant citizenship based on, your 2,000-year claim and based on the Zionist narrative? But then people that still have family, that still have homes, why don't they get the same right to return? I'm just curious, because there's a law of return for one ethnicity, and then there's the refusal, right? There's you cannot come back. I cannot go back to Safad and live there where my family's from. I can't go back. Why? It's because I'm not Jewish. So then you start to think, okay, that's kind of for people that don't understand, it's a really good way to put it to them, because you have Jews that have grown up in California their whole life, and then they go on these birthright trips for 2 weeks, and they go and they party in Tel Aviv and they have the best times of their lives. But then you have, not even 100 miles from them, you have these generations of Palestinian refugees that have been living in Jordan for 70 years, and they don't have citizenship in Jordan, and they can't go back to where they lived. Tell me why. And then they don't have an answer.
Yeah, exactly. So this is something that another part of our branding that we haven't been pushing enough, that it's basically to take the religious Zionist claim that they're returning to their ancestral lands from thousands of years ago. So that's their ideology, and they've been striving for it for centuries. So let's use that. Like you said, and okay, you guys are claiming this as part of your entire Zionist movement, and Zionist project is based on that. We have even a stronger link. My dad was born there, not my a genetically removed 2 millennia ago ancestor. No, I'm talking about my own dad born there.
Exactly.
Syrians have Syria, right? Iraqis have Iraq. Most refugees have their own countries at the end of the day. Palestine, it's not yet a sovereign place that's controlled by its own people. It's not self-determined. Israel controls every single part of it. And this brings me to another point where, if you have debates today on Facebook and on Twitter, the number of American friends of Israel, let's call them, or Zionists, that are unaware of the fact that Gaza, when Ariel Sharon, forcibly removed a couple of hundred Jewish settlers from Gaza unilaterally, that Gaza didn't become free. And I keep hearing from these people that, but look, we withdrew from Gaza and look what happened to Gaza. I bet you will, if you go into any clubhouse room to debate with Israelis, that comes up especially by American
I know.
Zionists. Oh my God, it's like, oh, look at Gaza. Obviously, we all know that Gaza is the furthest thing from sovereign on the face of this earth. When we say open air prison, it's becoming like almost like a cliche, but it is. Basic shit isn't allowed even in and out of Gaza. You know, people are barely allowed to leave. And it's hard to leave, hard to come in. Right now, there's no fuel. There's not enough fuel even. There's just, it's insane what's happening.
What I'll say about Gaza, because this is my hometown, I'm gonna go on a bit more of a positive note here. But in Gaza, there's this movement that's happening where people have to eat. I keep going back to this. People have to eat, and people have to take care of their kids. There's this movement of technology outsourcing, and it's crazy because that's the one thing that Israel cannot block them from exporting is technology and code. So you have مثلا Manara, which is an organization created by the founder of Gaza Sky Geeks, which is another organization that, you know, trains coders, and they have a startup accelerator in Gaza. And man, it's incredible. And it's incredible to see these people, the things that they do. يعني في مرة اسمها مجد مشهراوي. She's probably my favorite person on the planet of this earth. And I was supposed to do, I'm still trying to get in contact with her. She's like a celebrity. And she had two startups. First one was called Green Cake Mix. And she basically created a mixture of cement from ash and rubble. Because her problem was cement it's hard to import. And we have an abundance of this ash and this rubble. And she went through so many iterations, but she created the right mixture. Now she sells it in Gaza. And it's more environmentally friendly. It's lighter. And it's cheaper. And people are building their homes with this green cake mix. And the other startup that she has called Sunbox. Sunbox is it's a box, and you can share electricity. It's like all families. So you can share electricity with other families to power your TV, to power this, and it's way cheaper. And, you know, these things, أنا دايما بفكر بفلسطين, and I always tell this to Palestinians in the diaspora, like, you need to switch your way of approaching Palestine and not look at them as masakin, wa ya haram, I just want to give them money. You have to look at Palestinians living in Palestine as actually like way smarter than you probably are. And like these people have gone through so much shit that they understand what it takes to survive. And if you gave them the right resources, it's important. If you gave them the right resources, they would thrive. Bro. And I say this all the time, and that's, you know, why I created Grow Home. But these people understand the problems. They just need resources. They need access to opportunities and access to networks, and they'll make it happen. And you have people in Gaza interning for Amazon, man. Isn't that like crazy? And I'm not saying that's the end all be all. I'm just saying, you know, there is some positive aspects of looking at these places that are just, you know, you look at them and you just feel bad. But no, there's people that are making stuff happen there. They look at problems differently. They look at problems as potential opportunities for businesses, for startups, etc. And it's just amazing. And Gaza, it's very, very special place in my heart. And my hope is for Gaza to become like Singapore in the future. But you know, I do think that we need to center these Palestinian voices and highlight Palestinian success. I think, you know, today I was talking with Yazan Sahwil, who is the most successful Palestinian founder ever. He has a SaaS company. He's competing with Silicon Valley businesses. And he was telling me, you know, our problem in Palestine in the entrepreneurship ecosystem, in no matter role models, we don't have like a unicorn company that's come up. We don't have any role models. And I think that's the same for the political aspect of it. And I don't look up to these political leaders. I really don't. We don't have a Nelson Mandela, right? And we have like Hassan Kanafani, we have Edward Said, وهيك, but for me, growing up, at least, I didn't really have any leaders to look up to. And that's part of the branding problem. We also don't understand the power of lobbying in America. Last week, I was talking about this, about how we don't have any Palestinian lobbies in America. طب ليش? We have so many successful, rich Palestinians. Why can't you come together, create a pack, and try and influence policy?
You know what? It's amazing that you mentioned that. For whoever's listening, and for you, Marwan, about 20 years ago, there's a guy, I'm just going to call him George. He started a lobby group. I met George, I think in 2003 in Princeton, New Jersey, in a deli, and he pitched me a Palestine lobby group. Basically, it was a 501c3 and a 501c4 working together in a similar way to AIPAC, the pro-Israel lobby in the US. And it was such a strategic methodology that he applied, nothing to do with trying to use emotions and passions and this traditional activism at all. It was literally looking at congressional districts, district by district, isolating a small number depending on how much budget we have for that year, and figuring out who of the candidates that are running is susceptible to vote pro-Palestine whenever legislation comes up. And the aim is to basically get elected officials to Congress that when they have to sign off on the Israeli aid, the $3 billion taxpayer money that goes to Israel every year, they would actually decline and demand something in return, because the constituents that voted that representative to office actually communicated that kind of pressure to that congressperson. So that congressperson would actually have pressure that exceeds AIPAC pressure on them when it comes to voting on Palestinian rights and Israeli rights. How do you get there? Americans don't give a shit about Palestine or Israel or Rwanda or the Uyghur Muslims or Bosnia or just name it. They don't care. Most Americans vote on taxes, they vote on healthcare, they vote on immigration, they vote on sometimes bullshit,
domestic issues,
social issues, and domestic issues, sometimes abortion and gay rights and things that actually have been pushed on them by media, which don't really affect their lives. But the things that do affect their lives: healthcare, taxes, immigration, those top three, and the economy, obviously jobs. They don't really vote on even environmental issues. Most Americans don't care. They'll give a shit about. From my understanding, like the XL pipeline, for example, isn't really on congressional district number 3 in Utah. That's not what they vote on. Even though it's domestic and it's environmental. So why the fuck would they vote on Palestinian issues? And they honestly don't. And so George, in this lobby group that was active for nearly a decade, and then now it's shut down. It's shut down. Yep, it's shut down. It was called the American Association for Palestinian Equal Rights, AAPER.
Okay, why did it shut down?
I won't get into it right now, to be honest. Not because there was anything sinister or foul play, but because I don't have all the information.
Okay.
First of all, just look at what most Palestinians, they don't go to AIPAC website. Just go to AIPAC.org right now. Go to their historical press releases dating back maybe just to the Iraq War, 2003, the invasion, right? Mm-hmm. It's all out there. It's not conspiracy. AIPAC works on policy and gets shit done. They pushed the US to attack Iraq in 2003. They say it's not me. It's not anti-Semitic. It's not like I'm trying to, say, the Jews control the US government. No, they don't. They don't control the US government. US government is controlled by a multitude of lobbies on certain issues. The tobacco lobby is not gonna fight for America to go into wars because they're not tied to the industrial complex, to the military industrial complex. Each lobby works on their own thing. So AIPAC is interested in towing the right-wing Israeli government for political reasons, nothing to do with Judaism. They're just interested in destabilizing certain countries around them for many strategic reasons, and it's politics. It's a game. Basically understanding how AIPAC was successful over decades, and because if you go back to 1948 and you look at the American voting trends, Jews were being discriminated against anyway in America back then. And it's not like congressmen were clamoring to protect this new state of Israel. Exactly. It was actually the work of AIPAC and many other very passionate organizations, pro-Zionist organizations, some of them liberal, some of them conservative, and they pour into making sure AIPAC specifically, the mechanism was, they made sure that whoever is in office in a certain district, they think twice before voting in any way that criticizes the state of Israel or the government of Israel. So the Palestinian lobby was born back then. And there were other groups around. There was the American Task Force on Palestine.
We're late, man. That's the problem. We're late.
Oh, yeah. Listen, back then, by the way, when I used to fundraise for this lobby group in the Middle East, because one of the 501c's was able to get foreign money because it wasn't the lobbying arm, it was the educational arm. So there was kind of a two-tier organization. And you're in the US, you're invested in this, you're already on Canary mission, you just have nothing to lose. You should just fucking do this, man. I'll connect you maybe with the George to give you all the blueprints, man. Listen, yeah, I'm already getting goosebumps right now because the methodology of pressure on congressmen is a science. It's not rocket science, but it's political science. And we don't have people working on that.
You know who's more powerful than AIPAC? Christians United for Israel, bro. They are so powerful that it's a bunch of Texas billionaires that are evangelical Christians that believe that once the Jews arrive to the land of Zion, the Messiah comes back, and then the Jews die. It's a biblical prophecy that they have and that they believe in. لا بس اسمع, it's important because these evangelical Christians were the most important voting bloc for Trump. So what happened in the last 4 years is that these evangelical Christians that, unequivocally support Israel, and they were supported by Trump. Trump had to appeal to them because they were the biggest voting bloc. So he had to go and be friends with Netanyahu, and he had to go and, move the thing because of the pressure that this political lobby, this very powerful monetary political lobby exerted onto him and the constituents.
Listen, absolutely, yeah. Christian Zionists have been around for decades, and you're right, their pressure has been growing. One of the reasons that the Palestine lobby did not succeed, tech and data wasn't as advanced 15 years ago when this was like trying to pick up. It wasn't out there. Today, we have so many tools, man. We have so many tools, social media, data tools, aggregation tools. We can really do something. And the beauty of the American political landscape, there's a lot of transparency, despite that now there's dark money with Citizens United and all those PACs that are contributing secretly. But still, the US system is very transparent.
Yeah.
You can do a lot there. The Palestine lobby idea is amazing, and it has to be done. And now that you're in the US and you're seeing it, I want you to really think about it, because honestly, even if you had a pro-Palestine president, let's start from that baseline, Bernie Sanders as the president. Let's say Bernie Sanders was president. Nothing is gonna get done based on his ideology. Nothing, because that's not how it works. That's not how it works. Congress votes, and there's something that I want to touch upon here. Maybe you can also talk about this. This is something also very new. Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, the Democratic Socialist movement in the US, which is very moral movement. I don't know how much you were into the last election cycle where Bernie was leading the primary. He won the first 3 states. The Democratic Socialist movement in the US. And then you have the Squad with Ilhan Omar and Sheila Tlaib and all those guys. Tell me that this is not a coincidence that American politicians that are morally for the working class, they happen to be the ones that are
pro-Palestine,
that understand the Palestinian cause. Is there something here that's I'm just missing? I'm not saying that if you're Republican and conservative and pro-business and low taxes that you're evil. I'm not saying that at all. I'm sure you come from a place where America for you is this land of opportunity where you want to keep it this flexible and free where everybody can get rich. That's your way of doing that. Great. Look at Jamal Bowman, for example, African-American congressman from New York. He unseated Elliot Engel. You know who Elliot Engel is? Look him up. Elliot Engel has been in Congress for decades. He was behind so many pro-Israel bills in Congress. He wasn't known as much as the pro-Israel guy for most of his voters. He's just an establishment Democrat, And he got unseated, man, last year by Jamal Bowman, who is hardcore socialist Democrat. Very much aligned with giving Palestinians their civil rights. So there's this alignment. I've actually left this dream of a Palestinian lobby 15 years ago, and I think it's about time to kind of dig it up from the grave and see what it's about. It's a movement that has so much moral firepower, and the strategy is all laid out. There are so many lobbies. Just look at the oil lobby, what they do. How do they do it? It's avenues that are open to us in the US. And by the way, if the US ever removes money from politics, completely just bans lobbyists, ahsan wa ahsan, because then people start voting on more cleaner issues, like more pure issues. There's no more
But they
special
haven't
interests.
yet.
But they haven't yet, and they probably won't. They
Yeah.
won't. It's a dream of mine. My children are all born in the U.S. My wife's American. You know, I wish that America was a cleaner place politically, but it's not. So, and you have to use the tools, pressure tools, for the righteous cause.
Yeah. No, listen. I agree. We'll talk after the podcast about this.
Yeah.
Because and even my friend Saif, who's on here, he's like, "Yo,
Yeah.
Bro, Saif is amazing, by the way. Saif,
Listen, the blueprint is there. You know,
that's what I'm saying.
It's insane, dude.
Isma, so going back to, do we have a branding problem? I also think we just have, and maybe this is because كتير مفرقين and we're very spread out across the world and we have different ideologies and stuff. But I always say this: as Palestinians, we know what we don't want, but I'm not of what we want. You know, like you are like, and it's. I mean, I understand because people have different definitions of what it means for Palestine to be free. This is a question that I started asking a lot. What does it mean for Palestine to be free? What does that actually mean?
Yeah.
And people have different definitions.
Yeah.
I think that the closest we've got is BDS with the 3 points. The first one being, equal treatment of Palestinian citizens of Israel, ending the occupation and right of return for refugees. But I do think that we can simplify the narrative. And once you simplify the narrative, it's way easier to reach out to a greater population, because you look at Israel and how they've utilized and mobilized their diaspora to actually create this startup nation. You look at India, and I call it the case model: copy and steal everything. The structures are in place, right? So you just need to be strategic about it. Israel utilized their diaspora. There's Jewish Americans that just write checks to the Israeli government, but they are united in that way. And I think that it's worth looking at, and I think it's worth exploring, the Jewish lobby in America and the ways that they influence policy. And I think it's really important to actually start being strategic about what we're trying to do.
Yeah. And that's what lobbies do. Like the gun lobby does it. The gun lobby has convinced millions of Americans that if you don't vote Republican, that your guns will be taken away. That universal background checks means no guns for you. Dude, universal background checks just means that, just checking if you're not a fucking maniac before you buy a gun. That's it. Who doesn't want that? So lobbies have insane, crazy, fucked up power. And they're not always used for bad, I must say. And that's why the Palestine lobby has to exist, and it hasn't. The difference, why a lobby organization would help us. When I was active, back then, an Arab American group paid for an ad. They paid for an ad in the New York Times, a full page ad in the New York Times. Back then, it was like 35 grand or something. One day, one page. Now it's like in the hundreds, by the way. Full page New York Times, a picture of an Israeli sniper, right, trying to aim at some civilians from far. And the slogan said, "Who's the terrorist now?" Or who's a terrorist? Paid for by some pro-Palestine group, right? When you spend $35,000 for a one-page ad in the New York Times, who are you talking to? Who opens the New York Times? Which voters are opening the New York Times? Who represents these voters that saw that ad? When you crunch the numbers, that ad was gone to waste. Yes, it might have, raised some eyebrows. Ooh, okay, interesting. The Israelis are violent. I didn't know that. We didn't know that the IDF can use excessive force. Oh, okay, great. So what? The lobby strategy is like, fuck that, man. That doesn't do shit. What you do with that money, dude, is that you hire a lobbyist to meet with the staffers of the only pro-Palestinian congresswoman. You go to her and you basically say, listen, you need teacher groups, teacher parent groups, your church groups in your congressional districts, there are taxpayer, advocacy groups. They look at her district. Where are the votes coming from? People don't give a fuck about Palestine or Israel, who's fucking the victim or who's not. They basically just funnel votes to her. If she's willing to look at the data for Palestine and be like, you know what? These guys are awesome. This church group actually is pro-Palestine. This lobby organization is awesome. You know what? They're giving me $10,000 to put ads on the radio, helping my campaign for re-election. I'm already interested in their cause. Like, you align everything, the money, the voter blocks in that district. You make sure you're not funneling it to someone who's running against a very right-wing Zionist congressman who's got $1 billion that they're going to wipe you out. Don't waste your money there. Literally stick to where you're going to win and start building from there. Get money into your door, start building a serious organization. So this is where like a lot of things that look strategic, that they really aren't strategic. And of course, if there's a Nakba Hollywood movie, which I've never yet seen one. Have you seen a Nakba Hollywood movie? I've never seen one. How many Holocaust movies are there? There's 1,000, literally, over 1,000 that have the Holocaust as the backdrop or as like the background story.
And also to add on to that point, there was a concerted effort in the 1960s and 70s, post-67, post the war, to create movies that vilified Palestinians. There was this company that was run by 2 Israelis, and they created in the span of 10 years, 20 movies where Palestinians were vilified and, you know, portrayed as just terrorists and portrayed as oppressive men and all this kind of stuff. So they understood the power that media could have on a population. So I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. Why isn't there a Nakba movie? Not one. I'm not talking about a documentary. I'm talking about a movie, a love story, a cool love story where the backdrop is Nakba, like shit's happening, they're getting kicked out. Where is that movie? Do we don't have screenwriters, Arab screenwriters that would write it?
No, we definitely do. I don't know, actually. Here, let me ask you a question, bro. You think that one of the best ways to advance our cause is actually to lobby in America?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Lobbying in America will halt normalization without demands, like what's happening with the Abraham Accords, you know?
So,
I'm not against signing peace, you know, or bilateral relations. You have to ask for something in return, you know, and you can't, if you can't, just say you can't. Like the UAE should just say, listen, dude, we're in no fucking position here. We lick American boots, we buy American weapons, Israeli technology, we need it. Israel is powerful. We need a boost in our economy. We're gonna
don't pretend to say you're gonna end the occupation.
Just say that, you know. Just say that, you know. Just say it. Just fucking say it. Say that, you know. We would love for Palestinian rights to be restored. We just don't have it in us. We don't have it, man. We just gotta sign this fucking deal and leave you out of it. You know. Obviously, they won't say that. Arab governments are the least transparent. They're just a joke when it comes to treating their citizens with any kind of like respect, sadly. And I understand it's not for any nefarious reasons other than survival. Yani it's not like there's an evil plot to subjugate Arab citizens. It's just survival. Like, hey, I'm in Jordan. You grew up a bit in Amman. You went to high school here. We both went to high school in Amman. You know, I mean, Jordan is a survivalist, surviving. Every single move that Jordan has done with Israel, peace moves, is survival. It's not for anything else.
Yo, you know, one thing also that I was thinking of is that corruption. Yani, people don't wake up one day and they're like, "Khas, I'm gonna be corrupt." Yani, corruption, there are incentives, right? It's all about incentives, because if you have an economy where it's more profitable, مثلا, to be corrupt, and there aren't the necessary incentives for you to actually serve your population and be held accountable by the population, of course you're gonna be corrupt, right? Yeah. Because corruption is the best way to solve your problems and to send your children to a good school and to actually, you know, make a decent living in these kinds of countries, in Nigeria specifically. You know, the economy, when it doesn't provide productive means to live a good life, corruption is the best way for these people that are already in power. And it's all about understanding the mechanisms, as opposed to just saying, they're corrupt, we're always going to be corrupt. I hate when people tell me that Arabs are corrupt and nothing is ever going to change because of عاداتنا وتقاليدنا. يا أخي عاداتنا وتقاليدنا, it's an evolution. It's something that has happened. It's ideas that have evolved over time that can change.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and I love, yani, I was watching Bill Gates' documentary yesterday, and he's talking about, he has an ad in the 90s where he's like, you are seeing the future. And then he's just showing a computer. And I'm like, wow, bro. And he was talking about, he's like, the future, we're going to have software stores. There are going to be thousands of software stores everywhere. And they're like, what? You know? So I'm just saying, like, open your mind up to what can happen. You know, we're not, as Arabs, we're not inherently corrupt. No one is inherently anything. That's another point that I would like to make.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, no one wakes up or is born racist.
That's true.
It's about incentives.
True. In many Arab countries, there isn't this liberal arts education of tolerance and humanities and an understanding of historical progression enough to kind of enshrine these values of, and you know what? Nobody is, like you said, nobody is inherently anything.
The last thing I'll say about that is that مثلا in Palestine, it's really hard to open a business. Super complicated. Why? Why is it difficult to open a business when you know that that's going to help the economy prosper? You know that if you have a system where it takes only 3 days as opposed to 3 months to open a business,
Yeah.
you can have more entrepreneurs. You can have people that are more willing to come back to contribute to the economy. طب ليش? Why don't you create systems, online registration systems? Why not? And the answer is there's no incentive. What are the politicians gaining out of it? Because the economy is not structured in a way that it actually, benefits the population and benefits the elite. So there's no incentive for them to actually do that. The incentive is rather you let these people struggle, and then the ones that come, you take 50% of their company, and that's it. State capitalism. That's what Palestine is. No, and it's such a shame, man. It's such a shame. But
Through your initiative, Grow Home, there was I heard the first episode of it today. On a podcast episode where there was someone pitching the Arabic language idea, and there was judges looking at it. So why don't you tell us about Grow Home? What is it exactly?
Tamam. So Grow Home, it's my startup. And what we're aiming to solve is it's a twofold problem, and I think it's intertwined. The first problem is that Palestinians in the diaspora are limited in their opportunities to contribute. And I think especially with my generation, we're tired of petitions. We're tired of sharing Instagram posts, and we're tired of, shouting and protesting. We want to actually do shit. And I think this is more for even millennials, people that have professional experience. It's very difficult, and we're limited in the opportunities that we have to contribute. On the other hand, you have in Palestine an emerging entrepreneurial ecosystem that needs a lot of support. And it doesn't need support from an international aid perspective. It needs support in terms of nurturing this ecosystem and creating an entrepreneurial mindset and creating startups and creating an ecosystem where startups are actually encouraged, because entrepreneurs are the one of the best drivers of economic growth across the world. Having more entrepreneurs means you solve more problems, means you create more jobs, and you create more products and services for people to consume, right? So these are called frontier markets. Palestine is a frontier market, which means that it's not developed, but we have the Palestinian diaspora that can actually get involved. So that's what we're doing with Grow Home. We're connecting Palestinians in the diaspora that have professional experience, that have networks, that have capital, and we're connecting them to startups in Palestine that need all the support they can get. So, mathalan, what you were listening to this podcast, what we're doing is basically a Palestinian Shark Tank. I bring Palestinians from Palestine that have startups that need money, and I have 4 Palestinian judges, investors from the diaspora. One of them in America, one of them in the UAE, and they pitch their startup to Palestinian entrepreneurs, and then they see if they get the money or not. We're working out a deal for one of the startups to raise 100K. If we can get that to them, he's going to create jobs. We're directly bettering the lives of people. So that's the point of Grow Home. And it's Grow Home, the cool thing about it, and it's scalable to every country in the world that has a diaspora population.
Yeah.
And it's going to be, and in my opinion, hopefully it's going to be a huge business, and it's going to be a profitable business, and it's going to change the lives of many, because I think that there is this inherent want always as Palestinians and as people living outside their country of origin to contribute. And what we're doing is we're streamlining that process. We're giving you opportunities based on the skills and the networks that you possess. Let's say you're Palestinian living in the UAE, you work in a venture capital fund. What you're going to see on Grow Home is Palestinians that need to raise funds. And that's where you can directly contribute, because you know the VCs in Dubai and you want to help Palestinians. So it just makes sense to connect you. Let's say you're in Silicon Valley and you're doing social media management for a big company. We're going to connect you with Palestinians that need help with social media management, right? Because that's within your capacity. So it's really streamlining the process and optimizing the process of actually connecting and making a change back home. Because as I said, people need to eat. Yeah.
Amazing, man. I love the idea, and Palestine is such a great lab to try that in, because the diaspora connection is unique, and there's so many, like you said, frontier market opportunities is insane. And you're right.
That's what I'm trying to change. I'm trying to change people's opinions on Palestine to look at it as there's so many opportunities. You look at it, you could create so many startups in Palestine because there's so many problems. It's a Walmart of problems. You can go pick the problems, and that's what a startup is. You're solving a problem. And when you solve that problem, and if you do it well, you affect the lives of millions. It's not just like in Silicon Valley where you're creating an AI fridge. You're actually, let's say you create a system or a company where you're like delivering food from refugee camps to Ramallah, you're creating jobs and profit for refugee women
Yeah.
مثلا, that are
Yeah,
cooking,
yeah.
and you're actually, so there's a lot of opportunities, a lot.
Yeah,
And
that's
this is the
amazing.
first step. This is
It's
literally,
amazing.
Grow Home is the first step in my journey to democratize opportunity for people that don't have them. Because I think it's unfair for people to not have the same opportunities that we were afforded, مثلا, just because of where they were born and the hands that they were dealt in life. And I think that we can bridge that gap through the internet and through even Zoom.
Yeah. So tell me, where would you think you would scale it next? Let's say it's the year on and yalla, you're gonna Egypt?
So we have like a roadmap, but like the biggest markets are Egypt, Tunisia, India is huge, Nigeria is huge, Somalia is huge, Ireland is huge, Scotland, Albania is huge.
Oh my God,
There's
man.
so many, bro.
Would love
And
to
our
start
goal,
a few.
come on, yani, there's a lot more that we want to do. We want to create mechanisms for people like us to invest in Palestinian startups through crowdfunding investing.
Yeah.
And that's something that's going to be able to happen, to buy real estate in Palestine, to be able to actually set up your company in Palestine, to be able to, there's so many opportunities, but it's,
You're
one
right.
step at a time.
You're right. There's so much, man. There's so much. Imagine if there's a way to own a piece of the Palestinian economy or landscape or real estate or anything, culture, like something, and invest in it, and even even if you don't want to become part of the ecosystem, you don't want to mentor anybody, you don't have anything to offer.
NFTs, bro.
Money. NFTs.
No, I'm being serious. Like, we're gonna be selling NFTs on Grow Home.
You're gonna do NFTs on Grow Home?
Later on.
Yeah,
right now, there's one use case that we're trying to do, but yeah, bro, definitely we'll have artists. We'll have also like, a place for Palestinians in Silicon Valley to hire Palestinian talent to come work in Silicon Valley. There's a lot of, we're gonna have, my goal as well is to open up physical incubators in these emerging markets, and connect them with investors, have places, have cohorts where refugees come and create a startup in like 3 months. And then go out into the world, and we connect them with the investors they need. We connect them with the people they need. Because these people, and this is my problem with international aid, is that they have their own rubrics and their own KPIs for success that don't take into consideration the needs of the population. They have it's the white man's burden. They have their system of like, this is how it should work because it worked there. So we're going to do this here. We're going to build this well. Let's say you go to Gaza, you're going to build a well. But you're not going to create the infrastructure to keep that well running for 10 years. It's going to sink in 6 months, and then you're left where you started. You're going to create a school. The international aid Swiss organizations are going to come build a school, but they're not actually going to train the teachers. You know what I mean? So that's why empowering local talent is so important, in my opinion, because they know the problems and they know the solutions. They just need access to opportunities to actually make them happen.
Man, Marwan, this Grow Home thing is insane. وانت as an ambassador in general, you have a big following on TikTok, and you have a couple of cool 1-minute rants about Palestine, which is for many people maybe an out of place medium, but it's great. It's consumable, it's quick, it's cool, it's hip.
Imagine Nelson Mandela had TikTok. Like, imagine he was able to disseminate the information in such a fast way. Like, he probably would have sped up the process by maybe 5 years, in my opinion. Wallah, man. Because, like, imagine on TikTok, you can disseminate information in less than a minute, which is now, unfortunately, like, the attention span of the average consumer. You can disseminate that information and it can reach 1 million people in less than 24 hours. Yeah.
What about your music? Tell me about your music. I heard your Jerusalem track is amazing.
Habibi.
And the other one as well, in the streets, the Hadr. Or Hajar is really cool, man. Tell me, what's your plan with the tracks? They're really good. Are you looking for record label? Khalas? Do you want to elevate? Do you want to jump to the next level? What's in the pipeline? Tell me.
All right. So with the music, when I was a senior in high school, there was like a battle between the schools, between Kings, ACS, and we started dissing each other. And then I dropped a diss track against ABS when I was like 16, bro. And then it was, bro, it was me. And then it was trash, right? But like at the time it was good. Then there's this rapper, Imad, his name is Sagr al-Arab. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. It's a Jordanian rapper. And I was like, let me diss him too. I made a diss track to, I guess, Sagr al-Arab, and it leaked on WhatsApp, and everyone started sending it to each other, and And the school got involved. They were like, yo, if you drop this, you're out. Like, because I was already on thin ice. Like, and the song is called Musibbi. So it was like, like, oof. And bro, it spread everywhere. Then, I was just like, I love music. Me and my dad always, I grew up on music, Lenny Kravitz and Wyclef and Timbaland. Like, I just grew up on music and rap. And then I started doing it and I started recording and I got better and better. And now, I dropped Jerusalem Freestyle and I'm almost at 100,000 streams. And never in my life did I ever think I was going to get to that with no promotion, with no manager, 100,000 streams, bro, with nothing. Like, I just made this song with my housemate in October on a shitty, like $50 mic. We mixed it ourselves, everything. And he made the beat. And now people are like, oh, it's that rap, bro. I'm like, no, I just do this as a hobby, but I love doing it and I'm going to keep doing it. And, if I can represent Palestine on a global level through my music, I'm gonna do it because I think music is a great medium. I mean, we're talking about the branding. Yeah. Imagine DJ Khaled actually put on for Palestine. Like, imagine he was actually an advocate for us and not just like putting us on his chain. But then he goes and does a thing with Sabra Hummus. Like, imagine he was actually, you know what I mean? Like, that would be crazy good for us. Absolutely. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be like Drake level famous, but also stay true to my values and like, imagine my like, this will be the moment where I'm like, I'm willing to die now, is if I do a concert, right, and I want at least 20,000 people in that fucking stadium or arena or whatever, 20,000 people, and I want to be able to go and talk like we're talking. During this, in between the songs, I want to be able to come and say, yo, like, just the influence that I can have through my music. And I've already seen this. People texting me like, yo, I never, like, that song Jerusalem Freestyle, that was insane. Like, what? It's just a really good way to relay a message, to make it catchy, to make it relatable, to make you understand, and not so much in your face, right? It's like, this is good music, I'm going to listen to it, but there's also a message. And not all my music has a message. Hajr is dumb, but like, I still bump it. Hajr. But like, that's the goal. And I'm going actually to Mexico in a month and I'm going to record like 15 songs there.
No way.
Yeah, bro, because I have like this guy that believes in me and is funding what I do now, which is cool because, that happened because I put out content on Instagram and someone reached out to me and he's like, yo, I love your music. I want to work with you, help you out, do whatever. I have an open check for you. I'm like, okay, that's really cool. This happened because I put something out on Instagram.
Man, I'm going excited.
To Mexico. I'm going to Mexico, bro. I'm going to record 15 songs and I'm going to drop one every 3 weeks. And hopefully one of them is going to explode. And then my goal this year is to become established and to do this, not full-time, but to be able to do this and make a living.
Damn, man, I'm glad that I'm hearing you talk serious about this.
But the thing is, I'm not trying to sign to anything or anyone yet because I want to have leverage when I do it. I want to be able to say, yo, I want to own my master's in publishing. I want to be able to set the terms. But right now, I wouldn't be able to set the terms, right? Like, for example, there's a company, a record label, اسمهم Empire, and they're owned by Ghazi Sham, who is Palestinian. And these guys are huge. But I know that if I went to them now, I wouldn't set the terms. I want to be able to go when I can set the terms because I want to own my masters. I think that ownership, especially in this industry, is the most important thing. It's ownership.
Yeah. Yalla, man, I'm excited. That's amazing. And honestly, this if you devote time to it, it looks like, from what I've heard already, there's going to be some really viral tracks on there.
Hopefully.
Which will,
and even if it doesn't, even if there's not any viral, like, people text me like saying, yo, I love your music. Like, I listen to your songs when I'm sad. Like, and that's all that, like, to me, that's amazing if I can do that for one person. And I love making music. So yeah, I'm going to keep doing it.
Man, amazing.
That's the thing. I'm a very ambitious person. I think that's the way to live life. I connect more with ambitious people. I love when people are passionate. That's like, even if you're passionate about selling mangoes, bro, if you're really passionate about it, like, you're going to be my friend. So yeah, I'm very passionate about music. And I think, this is so cool, by the way.
Thanks so much, buddy. I'm excited for all the stuff you're doing. You're like the Renaissance man, music, Grow Home app, fucking, debates,
doing
podcast.
My best, bro.
Man, you're amazing. Angel, I'm really excited. Good luck with the music next.
Thank you so much,
next chapter. Good luck with fucking undergrad school, man. Get that shit out of the way.
It's almost done, bro. This is like the finals week, so normal. I have like 2 more quarters and then I'm chilling. Thank you so much for this.
Man. Yalla,
Talk soon.
Follow Marwan on social media. He's active on TikTok, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and other places. And catch his music on Spotify. Also follow Howdy Arabia, subscribe on YouTube, and follow me, Imad Shawa, wherever you find me.